I hope she made lots of spaghetti.
If you've watched my videos before, you know that I like to build things compact. Whether it's C-Block or Space Age, I am always trying to fit as much stuff onto the screen as possible. Even my Satisfactory base ended up compact, but strangely enough, I've never attempted a hyper-compact base before. Sure, my space platforms could qualify, and when it comes to sheer space efficiency, it's hard to beat the builds in my Mega Base, but I'm talking about the kind of compactness you can only see in the Factorio promo art. That barely controlled chaos of the spaghetti base. Today, I'll be making a mess, and to facilitate that, I've gotten Code Green to make me a mod that destroys any buildings that are built in parallel, making neat, orderly rows utterly impossible. It started out for any buildings of the same type that were in a row, but when it became obvious that that would make diagonals the meta, we quickly changed it to allow only 2 in a row. It should horrify you already that I decided that diagonals would be too orderly for what I have in mind. Also, to encourage density, if you place anything that isn't next to another building, it explodes. And so I've got to build these webs of stone furnaces just to be able to start placing down some mining drills. Also, today I will be the color of cooked spaghetti. I'm using completely default settings, and as is the rule whenever I'm trying to play a normal run, I have spawned in the desert. Despite the circumstances, the start is pretty normal, as I'm just setting up some burner mining drills directly into some stone furnaces to get me some starting supplies. However, I need to try very carefully to avoid breaking the rules, because I get no warnings, and at this stage of the game, losing a mining drill is a little costly. This is also before the rules were relaxed, so it's extra fun trying to figure out where I can even place some of these without incurring the wrath of the spaghetti gods. It's not much, but I've got at least a trickle of iron, copper, coal, and even stone. This isn't like your usual run where I would have slammed down like 30 of these burners by now, because even if I had that many resources, what would I even do with them? I did want just a little more coal though, and thanks to the rules I had to do this to avoid the wrath. I'd be surprised if anyone has used a burner inserter like this before. So because I've got to build next to existing things, I've got to go back to the spaceship and start setting up the power for my labs there. These little chunks of spaceship can go, but the ship itself will be our core. I build this tube to get some water and then set up the first boiler right next to the ship, and that's because it so conveniently has 5 inventory slots, so I can just use it to carry some coal for the boilers. This is also when I realized that the mod was still a little overtuned, because even rotated boilers will incur the wrath of the gods. But eventually I got a small setup and can start doing my first handcrafted research to get automation. With that, I can set up some extremely rough science automation using chests and assemblers so that I can focus on other things. Those things being some basic supplies automation. This is where the run really begins. Pretty much everyone should set up one of these basic belt assemblers the moment they have spare iron, but for the game to be bearable, you usually need at least 4 things automated: belts, inserters, assemblers, and mining drills. That'll be my first goal, and because this is the spaghetti run, that's not going to be so simple as you'd think. This is when things were adjusted to allow me to place 2 machines in parallel, but that won't help much. In any other run, I'd just make a stack of 48 furnaces that outputs a full belt of iron and then use that for everything, but because I'm bound in my faith to the spaghetti gods, I've got to expand this thing in the most naturally unnatural ways possible. Right now, that means a lot of direct insertion from furnaces. The main thing I'm missing is circuits. Even a small circuit setup like this will make my life way easier, but there's a reason most people don't try to directly insert from furnaces like this. It's extremely inconvenient and kind of silly, but that's the name of the game right now. I imagine it's a little hard to visualize what's even happening here, but trust me, I'm a professional. It's all a game of getting the right things in and out, but this is only a primer for where this run is going. I'm not even going to try and bother explaining it all until I've got some raw ores into it, but basically I'm splitting the copper ore and iron ore lanes with coal all the way, since that'll let me run any furnace with just that belt. Then it's only a matter of directly inserting those finished plates. I've also got this inserter filling the ship with coal for the boilers on the other side. But as you can see with this beautiful demonstration, everything is working flawlessly. I've got these 2 inserters on the same underground sharing the output of the second assembler with the iron input of the first. Ignore that I got one of the inserters backwards, I am under a lot of pressure here. With a few additions, these will make me assemblers and mining drills. Inserters are still important, but with the kind of complexity that this playstyle requires, handcrafting isn't as big of an issue as it would be otherwise, since in the time it takes me to puzzle this stuff out, I could have handcrafted hundreds. I'll save that for green science, but first I want to set up my red science build. It really is a puzzle, because the mod prevents me from putting all this stuff in a line, so I try something like this. I don't like how it looks, so then I try something like this instead. It proves infeasible, but then I settle on this incredible design. It's a lot of iteration to try and pack this stuff in while still obeying the divine commandments, but pretty soon I've got everything I need. I combine those onto one belt, and now I have a decision to make that will echo through the rest of this run. How many red science assemblers? I decide on 5, and if that sounds small, you might change your mind later. A single gear assembler will take care of all of these, and since I don't need the iron plates anymore, I can use the same belt that went in like this with a splitter. Now that's efficiency. I want to start enclosing the ship, so I build the assemblers around it like so, but it can take some finagling to get all the outputs working. I'd intended to put a boiler here, but apparently even though I can put inserters here, the ship has a weird collision box, so a boiler can't fit. It's probably the fluid input's fault. Whatever, it's been almost 2 hours and I'd like some actual research already, so green science it is. I can extend off of this existing iron belt for the supplies and set up all the furnaces necessary to make the plates for the belts and inserters, while also grabbing from those green circuits I made earlier. With this insane contraption to move iron down here, I can make the belts like this as well. If I do it like this, the items will end up outputting onto the same side of the belt, and that's no good. But if I drop them from above like so, I can mix them properly. 5 red science assemblers demand 6 green science assemblers, so getting these all to work is pretty non-negotiable. Let me tell you, finding a way to extract the science from this whole mess was insanity, but part of this run is in choosing a place to fit something and deciding that by God it's going to fit. I've got this thing going to that thing, this long-handed inserter yoinking them onto the true output belt, and then this little squiggle to top it all off. It's perfect. Before I deal with that fully, I want a little bit more power, and this works. I can tell you, I have never chained together boilers like this, but there is a time for everything. That'll give me enough power to handle all the mining and assembling necessary for this level of science, so now I've got to actually fit it into the labs. It's not as easy as it sounds. Quick shout out to this little furnace I made to stockpile steel early. It was the absolute MVP all the way to the end of the run. So, most people just put all their labs in parallel, but that's not really an option here, so I've got to get creative. This is going to be the research center of the whole rest of the run, and so I've got to get it right. The easiest way to do that is, you know it, you love it, it's the Sushi belt. I'll just have these inserters read the whole belt, and only add more science when it's below a threshold. And with that, just this little thing can accommodate everything all the way to space science. Some people might say that this one tile of landfill is against the spirit of this run, and to those people, I say shut up. Ignore that those 2 inserters are missing power, I will take care of that as soon as I've researched medium power poles. And this is what I've got for red and green science. I should mention that, while I am trying to minimize it as much as possible, this isn't strictly about leaving no empty space. I considered it, but it felt kind of arbitrary, like, are lamps allowed, unnecessary turns in belts, suboptimal power poles? Instead, this base is more about growing like a tumor, and I'm proud to say that we have already subsumed the ship. Alright, I've got to finish out the mines to actually keep up with demand finally existing after 2 hours, but it's time for the next project. I better build this now before I get tempted to put it off, but I am in a desert, and so if I'll want ammo, grenades, and walls, I might as well combine them all. It's military science. I can make all the iron it takes off the main line, though I do need to be careful. With the ore split with coal like this, I've only got a maximum throughput of 7.5 plates, which is to say I can only feed 24 furnaces off this belt, and with this I've just about reached that limit. I've been building so slowly that all my pollution's been dissipating, but now that I'm actually researching stuff, the biters are taking offense. Even more reason to finish. Steel is a bit annoying to make because I've got to fuel the second furnace as well, but I end up with this thing. It borrows this coal from here since I'll be needing it for the grenades later anyway. And don't be afraid to just use inserters to change belts like this. The red ammo will borrow the copper intended for the red science, and thanks to the piercing ammo buff, just this one assembler is all I'll need. The other one will collect all the ammo into a box for defense purposes. And since this is where I'll store all my ammo, it should be properly defended. This is when I realized that the walls explode when put in parallel too. I asked Code Green to fix it, but it makes me realize something. I love the way that these exploded walls add to the aesthetic. See, you couldn't get this perfection if I was trying to fill every square. Anyway, speaking of walls, I've got to make them. That just takes bricks, and it means adding stone to my list of resources. But since I've got this random belt of coal here, I can leech off of it for the fuel and keep the stone input clear for the brick output. If you keep the far side of the belt open, you can make compact setups like this. That leaves the grenades, but they're easy, and will insert directly into the science assemblers. I got an extra one just to fill a box. It's always good to have grenades. Now, those of you a little familiar in the ways of ratios may wonder why I've got 3 military science assemblers to 5 red science assemblers. You need 5 to keep pace, but the answer is, you don't always need military science, so building it at half capacity and simply stockpiling bottles in the thousands is perfectly viable. I just marry that with the red science belt, add it to the sushi science, and there we are. I make a few engine units so I can build my own car, and then I drive around taking out my closest neighbors so that they'll stop bothering me. This is default settings, so they will be back eventually, but I've got plenty of time. Even so, it never hurts to automate gun turrets. Before moving on, there is a very important resource I've got to set up. It's so important it gets its own iron supply. If you haven't noticed, I'm using a lot of underground belts. And more than that, when it comes to tight spaces like this, better belts doubles the throughput with the same footprint. This furnace array is the closest thing to orderly I've built so far, and the best thing about burner inserters is I don't need to worry about the power poles not reaching the center. Those will pretty much all go into gears, and I don't want to overuse gun turrets and walls as all-purpose filler in my base, but they do have a legitimate purpose. This is the kind of base where building the belt automation takes half an hour, but I managed to squeeze it in all pretty well. The yellow splitters feed off the belt output from the green science build because I couldn't get the other ones to fit, and I don't actually have access to the green circuits necessary to make them, so, you might think that hand-feeding it circuits is bad design, but you want to know the difference between a bad hand-fed supplies build and a good one? This alarm that'll go off if it runs out of circuits and yell at me until I refill it. Now that's thinking like an engineer. No, I am not putting off chemical science, I am still thinking ahead. I'll need more power, and since there's a nice supply of water here, I might as well spread it out this way. I'm thankful for the 2.0 fluid changes, because now I don't need to worry about the steam throughput as I thread all these engines together. The best thing about the defense installations is that I can actually move them, because I have decided that I'll feed the boilers with the coal from the belt furnaces. I finished up my power expansion and make some dirty automation for rails next to the stone line. I've got plans for these. This is what we can call Phase 1 of the build. It's the beginner stuff, the easy builds. Chemical science is a completely different beast, but as the end of Phase 1, I have decided to make a rather drastic addition. It's best made now since everything will end up going around it, but this path will cut through the whole base in the future. It doesn't look like much right now, but just you wait. Also, not to sound like I'm shying away from making things compact, but these walls and roads will serve a very important function of giving me some wiggle room between builds while still looking dense and fabulous. It's also got some of those tastefully broken walls I've discovered. Again, I am mostly operating on vibes, and I care more about spiritual compactness than empirical compactness. And look, I managed to drive through it, and I only crashed twice. We'll christen the other side of the wall with this little pipe build, since chemical science takes fluids. And look, only 3 sciences in, and it already looks like a menu simulation. The mass spreads. And to anyone who says that those defense installations are pointless, the biters would like to disagree. There we go. Can't have any corners uncovered right now because I've got to have a big think. There's another major decision coming, and maybe you've already guessed, but I want rails inside my base. It's a lot to think about, and a lot to plan around, but whenever you've got a big intimidating conundrum like that, the best thing you can do is focus on what you can do in the moment, and right now that's setting up a mining outpost. Unfortunately, the rails are a bit broken. The straights and diagonals are fine, but the curves are not, because their collision box isn't detecting anything nearby when I place them. I yell at code green, and a few minutes later, they're functional. With these mods, we test in the field. Since this base is not only compact, but also an affront to propriety, it might not shock you to learn that I'll be using bi-directional rails. They're not actually that bad, assuming you know what you're doing. If you don't, well, it's like deciding you want to learn how to juggle and starting with the knives. I'm just going to loop the rails around the iron patch like this. This way, even though it's mainly bi-directional, it'll still leave space for multiple trains to be able to park behind one another. This is absolutely necessary for making a system like this work. The resource patch will also have this offset design that ensures that none of the miners will incur the wrath of the gods, but the best part of this whole thing is, this is actually just a really efficient use of space. It's not the most efficient, but it's also really cheap to build. Kinda funny. So I was setting up my station, and when I went to place the buffer chests, I realized that they are also subject to the rules. I think it would have been fair to make them exempt like belts and inserters, but instead I can place iron, steel, and wooden chests like this, and I think that's way funnier. Well, there's my iron mine, and access to ore on rails. All that ore will be dropped off here, and is much needed since I'm already using the full output of that starting iron mine. I'll just source the copper from the starting patch for now, but I cannot overstate how intimidating it is to start another build like this. So I escape it a second time by going to set up a coal train. I'm going to be reliant on coal power for a while, and it's something that'll need to get done eventually, so it's not a bad idea to try and carve out a spot for it early on. I've just got another loop around a patch like before, but I don't need to cover the whole thing. It also swings by a copper patch, and I'll set that up later too. Alright, actually fitting this in and leaving room for the rail network to remain adaptable is a little silly, but I make this thing here. I'll unload it like normal and bring it up towards the base. I'm just feeding it the output of the coal mine with a priority to use the mine output first, since I want that patch to be exhausted. I'm gonna be building there eventually after all. Most of this is temporary, but to the task at hand. The main thing I've got to make are red circuits and engine units. Red circuits are the most daunting since they take plastic from petroleum processing, and I'm still unsure of how exactly I'm gonna figure that out, but it's best to start with the hardest stuff. For all the red circuits necessary to make chemical science, I only need a measly 2 circuit assemblers. I'm directly inserting iron like before, but this time I'll build in the copper cables. To make copper cables, that of course takes copper. Again, in a normal run, I'd just make all the copper in one place and send it to where it's needed, but to get this sort of isolated spaghetti that I'm looking for, pretty much every section is made from base components. I'm also only making what's needed for the immediate product, so it's not like I can borrow off these builds later. I need 3 assemblers of copper cables, and they fit in fairly nice right here. I know it's kind of cheating, and I didn't need 3 inserters to meet this machine's demands, but it just looked a little bare. Anyway, those go into this mess up here, and I have never felt so accomplished making 2 assemblers of green circuits. I still need copper plates, and that means even more inline furnaces. There's just something about running steel furnaces in the middle of assemblers that really tickles me. It just feels so wrong, and yet so right. Regardless, for the roughly 10 red circuit assemblers I'll need, that takes about 2 cable assemblers, which needs about 5 furnaces to meet demand. You're gonna learn to love ratios. That leaves the plastic, and that demands chemical plants. Only like 1.1, but that still requires 2 chemical plants. I'm not building around speed modules because I've got some standards. Ordinarily, it would be difficult to put plastic production right next to the circuits, but since I'm powering all these steel furnaces on site, I can just borrow the coal they use for fuel to make the plastic. Obviously, that leaves the petrol, but we'll get there when we get there. That'll go on to share a belt with the green circuits, and that's everything to make red circuits. Don't forget the rule, no more than 2 in immediate parallel, and because of that, even though I've got the pretty simple task of making a bunch of the same item, I've got to make the build sufficiently wobbly. Outside of that, it's a somewhat standard build, insofar as it takes stuff off belts and makes red circuits. I only needed 10, but I fit in an extra assembler that outputs into a box. Since I'm building for close margins, it's good to have a nice little stockpile of those things always on hand. So that's taken care of, and so it's on to the engine units. I plan out the ratios with these handy display panels, and then it's off to work. This is where most of the iron ore is going, but the first step is to make it into plates. One thing that's quite cool is that I can use undergrounds to separate the coal off the copper line and isolate it. That's important because now I can use this whole line to supply fuel to the steel furnaces while still having room for the output. To make steel first also takes iron, and that'll run down below with its own set of furnaces, which also takes coal. But I can borrow the same coal from above and just drop it down with an inserter. Simply incredible. Unfortunately, there's a little empty space between the furnaces that I can't do much about, so I just litter some iron ores around so no one notices. That leaves the iron plates necessary for the gears and the pipes, but those sneak in really cleanly right here, once again borrowing the coal from that one line. It's a fairly significant iron demand, so I fit in another 4 furnaces, and I was careful to already plan around future rail lines, so I can't adjust it much, but to my shock, I actually managed to squeeze in 2 pipe assemblers right here. I had to use a little belt weaving, but that is snug. All the engines I'll need still take only 1 gear assembler, so mix that in with the pipes, and we're good to go. I know I said I'm trying to keep everything self-contained, but I have decided that I'll be making the engine units necessary for yellow signs here as well. But considering it's been almost 10 hours already, that'll be a good 30 hours away at this point. That means I'll need about 14 of these things. They fit in pretty nicely though, and the genius of this design is that since it takes 3 inputs, I can cover everything with only 2 belts. The belt carrying the steel input can also accept the engine output. Inserters always drop on the far side of perpendicular belts, so surrounding the belts like this means that the lower assemblers can't output since they try to drop it where the steel already is. But there's quite a few shenanigans I can implement to circumvent that. It fits the rails pretty snugly here too, though I do need to finagle these undergrounds a bit because I've still got to get the red circuits through. There's a few empty spots, but I am reasonably happy with how this one came out. I am definitely getting the hang of it now, but there's one missing ingredient: petroleum gas. But that's where these rails will come in. I've decided that I'm just going to put it onto a train and bring it here. I want things to be compact, and you can only unload fluid wagons when they're straight, so the best way to do this is with this pushing design. This way you can fit the train on all sorts of curves. I managed to squeeze it all in, and that'll supply the plastic plants, but there's one final ingredient. To make the sulfur in chemical science, it takes petroleum gas and water. Since I'm fairly close to the steam boilers, I'll just borrow the water from there and snake it in. That fits very nicely into the remaining space and shares the belts with the red circuits. I've got to make the rails a loop for now, but I'll clean it up later. That's roughly everything, and now I've got to simply make the chemical science. There's a beautiful little curve in the rails here that seems just perfect for it. Since I can't put anything in parallel, I have learned to really appreciate these natural curves, since they're the easiest to fill while still obeying the rules. Just like the engines, I'm using the engine belt to carry the science output as well. Coming from above, I've got to drop it onto the belt from topside, but the lower inserters are much easier. I need a total of 12 of these, and that is non-negotiable, resulting in this incredible mess I had to make to fit in the last one next to the rails. It takes the output of these two via undergrounds and uses an inserter to put them back onto the main belt in the correct orientation. Sadly, you're just going to need to trust me that this works, because I'm, missing a pretty important ingredient. I've got to get oil processing, but first, I have pretty much run out of iron in my starting patch, so I've got to set up another train to supply the first base. It's fueled by the coal train, and the smart thing about these trains is, since they dead-end at the drop-off stations but circle around the mines, the train actually swaps which locomotive is in the front each time. That means I only need to build in the fueling for one locomotive at the stops, because it'll keep swapping every time it shows up and end up fueling both. I go ahead and sneak in that long belt that takes the chemical science all the way to the labs, because I'm planning on building the oil processing up here. I don't need a lot, about 4 refineries running the direct petroleum recipe, and they squeeze in here pretty nicely. Since I've got to not only bring in crude oil, but also send out petroleum, that's 2 trains that need to fit in this cramped space, but I make it work. I'll fuel this train with solid fuel made from petroleum, since it's on site, and this station for the gas is the most compact thing I've ever made. It just barely fits. There's a reasonably sized oil field to the northeast, and I won't bother you with the details too much, but I do the same sort of loop I've been doing for all the other mining outposts: slap down a few pump jacks and heavy tile, pipe them all together, and then annihilate the biters nearby. All in a day's work, but there's crude oil on trains. I bring the train in, and while it's filling up, I set up some rudimentary defenses. It won't stand up to continued attacks, but we're not making megabase pollution here. It'll be enough to keep it safe. There we are, a couple refineries slowly making petroleum gas. Since fluid wagons hold 50,000 units now, it'll take a while to fill up totally, but I want to see this thing working, so I sent it out a bit early. Since it doesn't have a locomotive in the back, it needs a temporary loop here as well, but again, I'll fix that later. You see, this place where it stops is actually part of the main line, meaning other trains are going to want to use it, so I can't just park this thing here for eternity. I've got a circuit condition set up to disable the stop unless the tanks are empty. That way it'll show up, quickly top them off, and then park back at the oil processing area, thus clearing the line. Regardless, that's our first trickle of chemical science. It'll take a while for it to spool up completely, but that's a major step forward for this base. Also, I cannot believe I forgot to enable the Disco Labs mod this whole time. Anyway, one of the biggest things I'm excited for are electric furnaces, and that's because they'll let me make plates without the need for fuel. I don't want to overdo it though, they are power hungry. There's another reason I want them though, but in the meantime I've got to set up concrete. There's some space below the chemical science assemblers that's perfect for it. The only ingredients concrete actually takes is iron ore, stone, and water, but it's actually pretty complicated. I want this stuff because reasons, but also because I want to decorate my base. The concrete itself takes iron ore and stone bricks, which I directly insert via furnace, but the refined stuff takes steel and iron rods, so I've got to make some of that here as well. Hooking the water up is the hardest part, but with these furnaces making steel and rods, that'll give me more than enough to eventually cover this place in concrete. I'm also going to take the time to set up a stone mine, because my starting one will eventually run out, and it's best to figure this stuff out early. I cover the patch with my usual offset design, and then it's onto the train, but I take the time to set up defenses as well. I am really enjoying painting these walls everywhere. It's got this odd natural feel to it when you just go all out like this. But with all that stuff plugged in, I've got concrete. Okay, I've been a little cagey, but the real reason I needed refined concrete was to make elevated rails. That takes purple science, you might say, but not that much. And since I had enough time to finish all the research it takes to actually make purple science while I was setting all this up, I can simply hand feed a bunch of assemblers to make it. It takes some time, but we're 12 hours in already, and there is no way I'm waiting until I get purple science up legitimately for this. There they are, elevated rails. I spent a whole 30 minutes trying to fit in the automation of them below the concrete, and it took tons of messing around, but I have somehow managed to squeeze it all in here. And thanks to that, I can finally finish out my design. You see, I've wanted to go around this starting lake to make a full loop around the base since the beginning, but now my dreams are finally reality. There is just something about elevated rails that make me unreasonably happy, and I'm also able to delete these temporary loops for the petrol train. It needs to make a whole round trip to flip around to the right direction, but this is perfection. I am really falling in love with this base. Yeah, so as hard as I avoided chemical science, I'm avoiding production science about 10 times as hard, and that's why I'm over here tacking on some more iron furnaces off the chemical science build. The funny thing is, usually the hallmark of spaghetti is being able to leech off of old builds until you've got a horrible spiderweb of overextended demand, but despite calling it the spaghetti base, this is so dense it is basically impossible to leech anything off of anything. That being said, I have managed to sneak on some copper plates through the red circuit build, while also making steel and some electric furnaces. The purpose of this whole thing is to automate some solar panels as well as accumulators. I've got to make some jank circuits on side to feed them, but to make the accumulators I need batteries. That means yoinking some of the nearby petroleum gas to make more sulfur, then combining that with some iron to make the acid, and then mixing that with copper and iron to make the batteries for the accumulators. While I'm here, I'm making yet another jank circuit build to make some laser turrets. I usually don't bother with these unless I'm planning to go late game, but I'm in it for the long haul, and turrets that I don't need to reload seem nice. And since I've got some leftover coal from the furnaces, there's no reason I shouldn't squeeze in a couple more steam engines. This is already barely enough heading into purple science, but it'll work for now. Once again, I'm on the display panels, marking down just how many buildings I'll need to match my planned science per minute, as well as the raw resource requirements. Now, how hard can one man run away from his problems? Well, I go over here and set up another iron mine, but that's okay, because we'll definitely need it heading into purple science. It's a nice and big patch with enough richness to supply my base for the foreseeable future. Okay, that at least had an excuse, but then I'm going over here filling up this space with solar panels and accumulators. Well, it was an empty area, and it does make power, so not that useless. Also, they're subject to the spaghetti god's wrath as well, so it ends up looking like this. All of that is nothing, though. I'm avoiding purple science so hard that I'm over here putting all that sulfuric acid I just made onto trains also that I can send it to some uranium mine. It's going to be ages until I can use this stuff. I don't even have any plans to actually refine it. Like, I'm gonna be glad that it's already set up like 15 hours from now, but this is getting ridiculous. A full 5 hours after finishing chemical science, I have finally run out of excuses. I've decided to start the construction to the north. It all starts with raw resources, so I've got to fit in another train for iron ore, but because I'm silly, I made it all squiggly. Believe it or not, it is perfectly valid to unload cargo wagons like this, though I do need to play around a ton so that the inserters evenly spread out the output along both sides of the lane. You don't want trains where the front wagon empties in 2 seconds while the rear one gets backed up. It's also important to balance them because I need more than 30 ores per second to make all the purple science I desire. I am thinking ahead because these will not only supply solid fuel to the train, but also the whole build ahead. It's using light oil I haven't even built yet, but in this kind of base, you've got to plan ahead. The reason I've been terrified of purple science is because it's completely unlike anything before. For purple science, in terms of pure industry required, you can think of it as over 3 times as big as chemical science. Compared to the, 40 furnaces I needed for that, I'm going to need 66 furnaces. For the iron alone, and another 55 for the steel, and a measly 21 for the copper. This is why, even though I've got access to electric furnaces, I am still using steel furnaces. They're just as fast as electric furnaces, don't strain my power grid as much, and are more than half the size. In terms of sheer space efficiency, they can't be beat, and when I'm trying to squeeze this stuff into a tight footprint, that is quite the advantage. I mean, who cares about pollution anyway? Though, my favorite part of this build is the random electric furnace I squeezed in because there wasn't any access to fuel where it was. I was able to fill this place up nicely, but it's not even close to what I'm going to need. Having the iron ore helps with the visualization, but I'd rather just get it up and running. That means building advanced oil production above. I've been afraid of this, and that's because when it comes to compactness, pipes are the devil. You can't get them anywhere near one another, but that's why I'll be using the cursed technology of the Uni-pipe to carry petroleum gas, light oil, and heavy oil all in the same pipe. I started out with this build, but looking at it, I suddenly decided I hated it and started over. My original design had a crude/water mixed pipe, but I decided to skip out on that. It'll take the crude oil from the same stop down there for the chemical science, but make it up here. I think it looks a little bit better than that other one, but there's just no winning with these refineries. This isn't all I'll need. I've resolved to build the rest elsewhere, but we'll get there when we get there. That being said, I'm gonna put all the oil cracking here. It is a massive challenge to make all this stuff functional while still looking chaotic and dense, because, like I said, different pipes can't touch. I get the heavy oil cracking set up to my satisfaction, but I'm suddenly struck with inspiration. I want my train stations to ding whenever a train stops at the station. To do that, I can set up the station to output the ID of the stopped train. The value doesn't matter, all I need is a signal to tell me that something stopped. I'll feed that into a one-tick filter and then put that into a speaker set to activate when T appears. Realistically, I only did this to fill some empty space, but it's worth it. I should need about 6 chemical plants doing the light oil cracking, and this mess of pipes is really coming together. I can at least use power poles like this to try and hide some of the vertical space between pipes. There's definitely ways that I could have made an oil refining build with no empty spaces, but it becomes much harder when I've also got to fit around all the curves and avoid parallels. Anyway, that'll cover it, so now all I've got to do is put all the oil products into tanks. To use this weird uni-pipe, I've got to attach a bunch of pumps to it and filter each of them to their respective fluid to isolate them into the tanks. But there it is! I think it's alright, given the circumstances. Most importantly, with the light oil pipe carrying light oil, those chemical plants can finally start spitting out solid fuel. You might be surprised to learn that only 2 of those is more than enough to supply all the fuel for this whole build, but it's true, and then some. Now take a step back and consider that I've done about 10% of what I need to make purple science. I've added a split to the above ground rails, and that's because I'm putting copper here. I don't have copper on trains yet, but I've had my eye on this patch for a while, and it goes up in no time. I just love the way that the bidirectional rails just spiderweb out like this, but while it might look chaotic, I am doing all of this with the confidence that I'm making it just smart enough to work. I'll fuel this whole build with another chemical plant. I don't need to be as particular about my unloading here since it takes less than a red belt of input, but it's similar to the first. Also, there is just something special about it coming down from elevated rails like this. This is pretty standard though, as standard as the builds in this run can be, and I'm able to fit all the furnaces I'll need in this space between the rails. I am really happy with how the elevated portion goes right over it. My only complaint about elevated rails is that when they go over a building, the recipe icon of the building underneath is drawn over the rails, so it looks a little weird. Regardless, this will take care of all of the copper demand. Once again, I've got some pretty major decisions to make, but I start with the easiest right now, and that's the circuits. I have still got iron I need to make, but this time I'll be using electric furnaces. With those, I can separate the iron ore to one side and then use the same belt as the output and the input. There's also the tiny iron demand of iron rods. I can do the exact same thing on the other side and make the 4 or so furnaces that those take. They may be twice as big, but you can't do this with fueled furnaces. I'll only need 2 assemblers making rods, and I'm not sure I have ever actually belted iron rods in my life like this, but these will eventually go into rails. All of the copper I just made will end up in cables, and since it's a little far from where I got the iron, I can use the intervening space to start staging all of the assemblers. It fills this space beneath the elevated rails perfectly, and it's also got the perfect amount of room to fit every bit of cable production I'll need. I've got to be careful to leave some room for the fluids to route through though, but then it's time for green circuits again. We'll need a total of 4 assemblers this time, and those squeeze around in this wonderful little arrangement. My favorite part is that it uses the iron belt as output, but then uses the undergrounds at the end to isolate the product and then escape over here. Now I can combine that with the leftover cables, and I've got 2/3 of red circuits. Purple Science is really hungry for advanced circuits, and so I'll need about 18 of these assemblers. It's a bit of an awkward shape to fill, but it's not unlike the other build I've already made. But I get everything set up, make sure it works, and look at it, and it could have been so much more compact. In this kind of run, you have really got to have the courage to rip up everything you just made and start over, and I'm glad I did, because this is way better. That leaves the plastic, and it's a little bit awkward, but I've run the petrol pipe right through the whole thing, and I'll make the plastic right below here. I end up stealing the coal from the military science build, and this thing's up and running. I am being completely serious right now. These are some of the most satisfying builds I have ever made. I am slowly being converted to spaghetti supremacy. We're not done yet, though. There's still the matter of the steel to be taken care of, and that's gonna take a whopping 55 furnaces to meet the demand. Purple Science is insanely steel hungry. Despite all of the furnaces to the left and the extra ones to the right of that, I've still got to make even more over here. Oh yeah, if you're making iron like this, make sure you filter your inserters to only pick up iron ore, because otherwise you'll sometimes end up making steel on accident. A fully saturated belt of iron plates can only feed 48 steel furnaces, and when I need 55, that's a little awkward. That extra couple furnaces I made will refill the build halfway through though, and so I've decided that it's going to be one big loop. But doing all of this with electric furnaces would be a ton of space, so I want to use the smaller ones. That unfortunately requires fuel though, and how do I fit that in? Well, the input belt needs to be fully saturated, but that turns 5 plates into 1 steel bar, so the output belt should have more than enough space. Except I might be dropping the finished steel in from the top or the bottom, so I don't want one half of the belt to be permanently locked up with fuel. Well, I've got an amazing solution. You actually need very little fuel for all this stuff, and so if I just make this a big loop as well, I can steal some fuel from the iron furnaces to the left, and then drop like 30 or 40 cubes onto the central loop and leave the rest clear for steel. The end result is this incredible array that snakes around the whole build so far. The circular belt is balanced here, and the steel is taken off with bulk inserters over here. I've also got the circuit output running all the way through. I have never seen anything quite so incredible as this. The only things I'm missing now are some bricks and stone, but since this is the only use I've got left for it, I can take the same stone lane from the military science build and put it up here. Just this will be enough to meet demand, and then I can finally use those iron rods to start making the rails. I feel like most people do not appreciate the sheer steel demand of rails. Just these 3 assemblers are going to devour more than half of that whole steel build above. Since the electric furnaces also take steel, I build them right next door, and then use the brick portion of that same belt carrying the stone. I only need 2 of these, and they'll also take advanced circuits, so while those are on the way, I can make the productivity modules. 5 of these will cover everything, and I can curve them nicely around the rails. Then as soon as I'm done with that, the reds will combine with the steel belt, and that's everything up in no time. I'm not quite done yet, though. I've still got to put them all together to make the purple science. To meet demand, I'll need 7 of these, and it might sound easy to just put all that stuff together, but I got stuck trying to think up how to make this one assembler fit for like 20 minutes. I was so dead set on it being flush against the bricks, and it just wasn't cooperating. But somehow I managed to finally find an orientation that works. You have no idea how much of a brain teaser playing like this can be. I'm convinced that this is the true way to play the game. Who cares about mega bases? This is the true test of skill. Stamping blueprints is one thing, but this requires all of your mechanical knowledge. I think more people should play like this. I went ahead and routed a belt for the purple science all the way into the labs before I even set any of this stuff down, and that belt will also carry yellow science in the future. There it is though, and this looks absolutely insane, but in a good way. Since this production is all isolated just to make the purple science, this might actually be a pretty good way to demonstrate the sheer difference in scale required just to keep up with 5 red science assemblers. All of this only took 24 hours. There's the end of another major era, and as is custom, now I've got to run away from yellow science instead. Though this is important. The biters are at the level where I can't just strafe them with a car anymore, and so I require some more powerful ordnance. Conveniently, the place making solar panels already has everything I need. I can make some more sulfur, plus some of the nearby coal to make plastic and explosives. With the steel nearby, that's enough to automate explosive cannon shells. Also, I never use these, but I've got the stuff on hand, so might as well make some landmines. I'm also making some jank processing units to hopefully get some power armor and exoskeletons up. Now we get to enjoy that rush of power that always comes with getting cannon shells up. I've also got some jank rocket fuel to make it go fast, and some jank electric engines over here for those aforementioned exoskeletons. Just a whole lot of errands I've got to do now that I'm in between builds, but at least I can research stuff with purple science now. Honestly, this doesn't get me too much, but at least I can make some beacons to fill in those empty spaces. Okay, so you might have guessed, but I've got some major power problems. The only reason that the lights aren't going off is because it takes so long to build stuff that this base is idle 90% of the time. However, I have planned for this. It's time for that uranium mine to shine. I'm going to be processing the uranium right on site. Some people think you need Covarex enrichment, but I am here to tell you that just this will be enough to power 2 reactors in perpetuity. That's enough for 160 megawatts. which I won't be using, and that's because I think it's really funny to offset the reactors like this. Even though they're right next to each other, this completely negates the neighbor bonus, and so this will only make 80 megawatts. It's okay, according to my 5,000 hours of experience, this should be enough. I only need a total of 8 heat exchangers to totally consume all that heat. The nuclear fuel will be directly inserted from this assembler and recycled over there. My solution for all the excess uranium is to just put it all into a box and set an alarm to tell me whenever it's time to clear it out. It's enough storage to last for like 20 hours, so it's a perfectly valid solution. It also borrows the tiny amount of iron necessary from the purple science build. Making these reactors by hand is exactly why I set up that box to stockpile advanced circuits like 20 hours ago. Now all I've got to do is squeeze all these turbines into this space. The water comes from the oil setup, and I am surprised that this all fit. It's a very important piece of the base, so I make sure to decorate it accordingly. With everything set up, now I've just got to call in the uranium train. It'll take a while to get running because each of these only has a 0.7% chance to make enriched uranium every 10 seconds. But thanks to the power of doing this thousands of times, it'll on average make enough to keep these sustained. I actually get extremely lucky because before I've even made enough of the unenriched stuff, I've already got a bright green rock. Now I've just got to wait for them to heat up, and there it is, 80 megawatts of clean, constant power. To be honest, just squeezing an entire nuclear setup in the middle of the base like this is hilarious to me. You know, I have never played so slowly that the starting lake has actually unpolluted itself. Now that the reactor's paved, it's making everything else look bad. I've been putting it off long enough, so let's decorate a bit. I'm using stone path for underneath the rails and all of the walkways, while standard concrete will cover everything else. It is very fiddly to make it look right underneath those curvy rails, but it is worth the effort. For the refined concrete, I've decided that I'll put it underneath all the machines. It's subtle and it's very time-consuming, but I think it looks amazing. This is so much better. With yellow science coming soon, this stupid starting coal patch is still in the way, so I am waiting patiently for it to drain before building anything. In the meantime, I'm writing down all the requirements for this science as well. Much like purple science, it takes a lot of industry. While production science takes primarily iron, utility science demands mostly copper, and that's why I'm down here setting up another copper mine. It's a little further from my base, so I defend it extra well. There's also some more oil nearby, which I will definitely need, and so it gets a similar treatment. The advantage to making chaos your credo is that you can get away with stuff like this. Legitimately, I set these up much faster when I'm no longer worried about straight lines and right angles. You see, this might seem like a gap in my defenses, but with these landmines, it is actually a clever ruse. The biters won't see it coming. Let's just take some time to appreciate the humble job of the mining outpost. That starting copper patch has really gotten me far, but this time I'm finally setting up a copper stop so that the kernel of my base will keep functioning even when it runs out. And now that I've finally got all these starting belts in their final states, I can refactor the whole area and clean it up. There's some extra space here, so I just put in some automation of medium poles. Now I've got this nice path running all the way through here, and over here I've got this new path as well. The main purpose of this path was to give me something to build all of these pipes around, because I've got a lot of fluid to move. Since I've got some petroleum and some water I can steal from the nuclear plant, it is the perfect place to make some sulfur. It even has some iron plates I can borrow to make the acid. Naturally, this will be for the batteries and the processing units, but don't hold your breath. This is all part of the master plan, because I have already decided that I want the rocket to be right in the middle here, and that requires a lot of planning. As usual, the yellow science starts with raw resources. To keep the tracks from getting too congested, I've decided to use an elevated portion that just skips right over the solar panels. It'll come down over here, and I can unload it normally. Just like the steel and the purple science, we're going to need more than a red belt of throughput, so I've got to balance it. My plan is to fill this whole place with electric furnaces, and thanks to the same tech I've demonstrated for purple science, I can make them very compact. More than that, I can actually make 2 rows. The downside of this design is that it can only smelt half a belt of ore at a time, but if I take 1 belt of ore, split it in half, then smelt it, I can put them back together at the end to get a full belt of copper plates. It's important that I don't exceed 24 furnaces per lane, though. I am a little bit leery about making builds that are as uniform as this, since compared to the red, green, and blue builds, it's a lot less chaotic. But I don't think it looks too bad, and especially not when I've done such an amazing job of fitting it all in. That is 48 out of the roughly 70 furnaces I'll require. It's enough to make the cables again, at least. I'm trying to avoid thinking about how this is my 3rd time doing this, but I've got to make green circuits and red circuits again. Unfortunately, this copper patch is where I'm definitely going to be building someday, and it's too much of a pain to hook up again, so I'm just going to try and empty it all into these chests while I'm working on the green circuits. Because the copper furnaces ended up so orderly, I really want to go crazy with this one. I've got to make even more circuits than for purple science, and that takes several cable assemblers. I've just got them snaking all over the place, but that's about 55 cables per second, and should be more than enough. You know what I've been missing? Some good old direct insertion. It's been a while, and since these still take iron, I've decided that I'm gonna build them just like old times. I unlocked Tier 3 assemblers with purple science, and while I am mostly going to be avoiding them since they mean using less assemblers, a few exceptions simply add to the chaos. Also, as it turns out, one Tier 3 assembler making green circuits is almost perfectly fed by 4 steel furnaces. Okay, it's only like 97% efficient, but close enough. Not all of these ended up being direct insertion, there's only so many sides of an assembler. With this technology, I'll need 6 assemblers in total, which requires a little more than 15 iron per second, meaning I can't use a half belt. But I'm taking a note out of that steel build for the purple science and making it a rotary belt. I've accounted for some light oil all the way down here, and it'll fuel the train as well as this belt. It'll only take a little fuel to make this thing work, and that leaves the rest of the belt free for iron ore. The actual input of the iron ore will come off the same train feeding the red and green circuits, and that'll go in like so. Tell me this isn't the most incredible green circuit build you have ever seen. I just love the kind of inventive solutions that this playstyle has spawned. Also, doing all of this has suddenly made me yearn for blue belts, and so I've made an extremely jank and temporary build for them. I am mostly after the longer undergrounds, but the blue belts will be saved for special occasions. And while I'm messing with iron, while it may be nothing compared to the rails, there still is a fairly significant steel demand for yellow science. I can use the other half of that iron belt and mix it with the coal that I've already brought in for the plastic. Oh yeah, I snuck a plastic build in there beneath the elevated rails. You know, normal stuff. Anyway, those will go into the inside of this belt and then double as the output belt for those steel furnaces. It's genius because they can use the fuel off of the raw ore belt in the middle. I haven't been making much of a fuss about it, but I laugh every time I get to place a burner inserter in a build meant to make yellow science. I wonder how many kilowatts I've saved using them. Maybe enough to power a whole assembler. I've got some extra time to decorate, but after a million years that copper patch is finally drained, and so I do the most reasonable thing and run over all the chests in my tank. It seemed crazy that it would end up expanding this far at the beginning, but this base has certainly sprawled. So that's all the raw resources I'll need. You might think that just because I started at the bottom, I'll keep building up the yellow science, but nope, I am over here making electric engines. This is a very tight space that I've got to fill, and so the best way to do that is to work backwards. There would be nothing more embarrassing than finishing blue circuits and low-density structures only to find that the rest of it doesn't fit. As promised, that engine build from like 25 hours ago is finally being used. Also, the lubricant has made quite the trip to end up all the way down here. It also takes green circuits, which I'll get up here somehow, but that's electric engines at least. I'm already setting up for the yellow science, and considering I've also got this space set aside for the whole rocket silo, it's gonna be a bit of a squeeze. There is some overlap, though. Since the death of the rocket control unit, the same processing units and low-density structures for the yellow science can also build the rocket. We also need 7 of these assemblers, and you have no idea how incredible it is that I've managed to make this work. It'll all somehow end up on this belt that just barely makes it past the electric engines and will merge onto the purple science belt to head straight for the labs. Now, I am not only building to win, I am building to win in style. This is the part of the video where I reveal that when I say I'm aiming for 45 SPM, I mean space science as well, but that means the incredible awkward necessity of building the satellite here. Surprisingly, I can actually get pretty far. The radars can borrow green circuits from the electric engines and iron from below. Then the satellite itself can borrow blues and LDS from yellow science and rocket fuel from the silo. But that still leaves the solar panels and accumulators. Except, that's right, all the way back to finishing chemical science, I was already planning for this. There's already a solar panel build, and now all I've got to do is bring it all the way over here. I've been trying to avoid unnecessarily long belts, but having the belt that circumnavigates the entire base being the one for the satellite is just another cosmic jest onto the pile. I am really glad I've got these blue undergrounds. It has quickly become a mess around here. You might look at this and think to yourself, there's no way he can fit all the robot frames in here. He hasn't even got batteries yet. And that's where you're wrong. It takes 7 assemblers of these to meet demand, and instead of many belts, what if we just used the one belt? I've been avoiding overusing sushi belts, but in circumstances like this, it smells like perfection, because there is no way it would fit otherwise. I have the electric engines and the green circuits here. Also, I love this inserter that balances the sushi belt, but I still need batteries and steel. This one inserter here will need to handle both, which means some circuit shenanigans. Managing to fit in these chemical plants to make batteries in here and then split it with steel is insane. Yeah, I've made the first bit and the end bit, now to finish the middle bits. We've got a lot of belts going through here, but I've tacked on a few furnaces for the batteries and radars. Since it's the closest to the sulfuric acid, I'll make the processing units up in this area. They're going to be quite challenging because of the fluid requirement. Assembly units aren't like chemical plants, since their fluid input is right in the center. It means that whole side of the assembler is essentially blocked off, which is an extra challenge when you're playing like this. I ended up iterating through so many designs. This was the most time I ended up spending on a singular build. There is so much I wish I could truly express that goes into making these designs, but there's something to be said about the fact that we're 50 minutes into a vanilla Factorio video and I still feel like I'm rushing over everything. Eventually, I end up with this, but it's missing advanced circuits. This is the third time making them, so I won't go over them too much, but this isn't actually going to be all the processing units I'll need. I'll make the rest elsewhere, but I'm making all the advanced units for both Yellow Science and Space Science right here. They're the most annoying, so it's a compromise for my desire for isolated builds. There's the copper cables, and I've also got to make some extra plastic, but, this is the first time I've actually been hit by a train this run. I kinda got lost in the sauce designing it, but it's finally time to fill out all these ghosts. I can't rely on robots to build it, because the mod would just explode half of the things they place. Now how do you like that? Perfectly squished into the corner. The solar panels and petroleum gas cutting straight through the whole thing is really what sells it. There is only one ingredient left, and that's the low density structures. If you'll recall, I said that I needed about 70 furnaces, and that's what the rest of this copper is for. I've got another belt mixed with fuel, and so I'll be making these all using steel furnaces to save on space. It ended up being a bit of a diagonal build, but I can only do so much considering I've got to fill the space next to a diagonal bit of track. Finally, I can use all that plastic and steel I made under the rails over there. I'm going to assume that you've got the idea by now and skip to the part where it's functional. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yellow Science is online. I have really outdone myself squeezing this all in here, and after 42 hours I've got all the major sciences. There's nothing between me and the game-winning research now. The best part of this base is zooming out and seeing all of the space that's been filled since the last time. I am really beating myself up over forgetting to enable replay on this save. A time-lapse of this would have been transcendent. Once again, I want you to appreciate the full industry of Yellow Science squeezed in like a wad of clay. Now I have the privilege of putting off Space Science, but it's only a few errands. I've been cutting them out because it's boring, but with how slow I'm playing, there's a lot of annoying biter expansions I've got to deal with, and so I'm researching artillery to help with that. More than that, artillery cannons just look cool, and the more things that look cool in this base, the better. Then, it was a bit of a dirty secret, but when I built these solar panels, I knew that they were short on copper plates to meet the 45 SPM demand on solar panels, so I've gone ahead and added up some extra furnaces down here that feed off the southern copper train. I know I've got like a mile-long belt of buffer that's probably got like 10 hours worth of solar panels on it, but it's the principle of the matter. Actually, there wasn't that much to put off, so it's time for the final phase. I've still got to make some more oil processing, so that's first. I did run pretty much all the pipes here, but not the crude oil, so I've got to bring that in. And while I could grab the water from the nuclear plant, I am going to do the most rational thing and bring water in by train. You remember way back when I said that that petroleum train for chemical science was the most cursed and compact station I'd built? Well, look and behold, this insane shape is somehow enough to unload 2 fluid wagons and still let other trains around them. There's water by the iron mine, so I just make a quick loop down there and set up a little offshore pump to fill it all up. Truly, this is the pinnacle of engineering. Like I said, it also takes crude oil, and I realized that since this is a pusher design and not bi-directional, it can't actually fill up at my crude oil stops, since there aren't any pumps in the front. But that's a quick fix. Now we get to build all the refineries again. It'll fit mostly beneath the rails, but it's a little tricky because oil refineries are actually too tall to put underneath elevated rails, so I'm a little limited in my compactness. It outputs onto one pipe, just like the first one, and yes, I did bring the entire mixed pipe down here. This whole thing leads all the way back to those tanks by the lake. There we go, that'll bring me up to the correct number of refineries. Hopefully you're not sick of seeing me set up furnaces again, because space science is really just yellow science's brother. It takes low-density structures, processing units, and instead of robot frames, it just takes rocket fuel. That means, yep, we are making a bunch of copper again. I'm sure you've seen this enough already, so let's just skip to the satisfaction of seeing it all squeezed in here. Just look at all this space still yearning to be filled. Now, I had to set up the belts really smart to make this all possible, but this is going all the way to the rocket silo. And since there's light oil nearby, that means we're making rocket fuel. It's easy enough though, because it only has one ingredient. I mean, technically it has two ingredients, but the second ingredient is made from the first. Because of that, I can make everything on a single belt, with the solid fuel on the left and the rocket fuel on the right. It's roughly 2 assemblers per chemical plant, and with everything confined to one belt, the backs of the assemblers are free to run the pipes. You want to know the best thing about this rocket fuel? Because the product itself is fuel, that means I can use burner inserters on both the input and the output inserters. At the end of it all, it gets separated by this underground and heads all the way to the silo. Right above it, there is a near-perfect amount of space to fit some cable assemblers. I've got to make circuits for the 4th or 5th time, but how can I be upset when it fits so perfectly? Yeah, so now all I'm missing is iron. I have really fallen in love with those rotary belts, and even though I could probably make enough iron with half of a blue belt, it's much more fun to use 95% of a red belt. Also, there's an open, easy source of fuel nearby, so no sense using electric furnaces. The iron train slips in this way thanks to the wonders of bidirectional rails, and filling empty space with accumulators feels like a bit of a defeat, but I'm trying my best here. Since I've already made all the advanced circuits, I can do something wondrous. You know how much I love direct insertions? Well, green circuits and blue circuits have a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning one assembler working 100% of the time is just enough to make the other assembler work 100% of the time. The result is, I can make this amazing sort of shell on the outside that carries all the iron and copper, directly insert that, and then rely on the central belt to carry advanced circuits and carry out processing units. After its journey around the blue circuits, that belt of iron plates will gracefully slide into a small little steel build. This is for the low-density structures, and that's basically it. With how effectively I've managed to route the sulfuric acid as well, this is definitely my favorite circuit build, and it's got some stiff competition. I love this almost plant-like plume it's created, like the exterior is absorbing nutrients from the sun while the interior is absorbing them from the soil. If I just wanted to win, I could have done it as soon as I finished that rocket fuel, but like I said, this is what it takes to make yellow science and space science. Even for 45 science per minute, it's a lot more than people think. The final ingredient is the second LDS build, and I am so happy with how well this has all gone. It slots into the last bit of unused space, and then the only snag is getting the plastic in. I just run a long belt and pipe from the other plastic builds for yellow science, but that is everything. The processing units and LDS here mix onto the same belt, and that eventually merges with the outputs for yellow science. That's not totally everything though. With most everything else in its place, I'd like to go around and do a final pass of decorations. I refactor some of the rails to make them run more tightly against the base, I fill this whole area with solar panels, and then I work on some more of the concrete decoration. Also, all over the place I am building defenses like artillery and flamethrowers. I have been cruising for a while, but turning this thing on will definitely cause the biters to start attacking me, and so all of these are more than just decoration. But with that, I build the silo in its rightful place. And never forget to install your 4 Tier 3 productivity modules. The rocket still needs to build first, and while that's happening, I figured I could upgrade my science per minute. You see, a Tier 3 assembler crafts at 1.25 speed as opposed to the 0.75 of the Tier 2 assembler. My base is built around that 0.75 speed for all the ratios, but if you fill all 4 slots of a Tier 3 assembler with Tier 2 productivity modules, that perfectly slows it back down to 75, while also giving a plus 24% productivity boost. Also, I just like all the science assemblers being Tier 3s. Altogether, that'll bring my previous 45 SPM all the way up to 60 SPM for free. This is why productivity modules are insane, but if it wasn't obvious, I didn't build this base with the intention of peak efficiency. Something I didn't account for was how much extra power that would demand. Tier 3 assemblers now account for over a third of my power consumption, and production is close, but instead of building a ton of solar, I decided to be a little silly. I've got some extra oil processing because there's so many burner furnaces feeding off of it, so I might as well put it to work. I've got some empty space over here, so I'll just make some solid fuel and throw it into some boilers. You can actually run steam turbines off of steam boilers, but there's actually an internal steam temperature stat, and steam out of regular boilers is only 165 degrees as opposed to the 500 degrees from heat exchangers. Meaning that even though the steam turbines promise an output of 5.8 megawatts, it's actually 1.8 megawatts on boiler steam. Who cares though, it's still better than the standard steam engines. The other thing I can do to recover some power is finally fill all my mining outposts with efficiency modules. Not only does it make them get attacked 1/5 as much, but it saves me a ton of power. And with power back in the green, even when running research at full blast, it is time to launch the rocket. Or so I thought. I was waiting for it to have a satellite before launching it, but it is mysteriously empty. I look at the assembly machine, it should be working, and it says 6 products finished, but there's no satellite. I am so confused, checking to see if it could have outputted onto a belt somewhere, but I find nothing. I wait here, watching it finish, and it just gets eaten by the rocket silo. It just straight up deleted it. I disabled all my mods to be sure, but no, it just kept doing this in vanilla. In all my years of playing Factorio, this is the only major bug I've ever encountered in the base game. More than that, I can't even launch it normally. I am physically not allowed to win. The satellite appears for 1 tick, so I've got to open the editor, put it in, advance time by 1 tick, and then launch it. It goes up, and there's the victory. Then it suddenly hits me. You know what I've been missing this whole time? The cargo landing pad. I completely forgot that that was a thing. I even had the output of the space science set up to come out from the silo like it's 1.0. It's hard to break force of habit. Unfortunately, that leaves me with the dilemma of where to put the damn thing. But eventually I settle on evicting some of the solar panels down here and weaving it in through with some of the other belts. Originally I was worried about leaving this space next to the silo for aesthetic reasons, but now I realize I was secretly a genius. Thanks to that, it all fits. Hopefully it doesn't feel like I'm dragging things out. This ending didn't really go as I'd planned. I actually deconstruct the silo and rebuilt it, and it seems to work normally now. I think something about inserting a satellite before there was a landing pad broke it somehow, but before I let this base loose, I go around adding roboport coverage around the exterior. I did this whole thing without robots, but now if I want it to run autonomously, it's kind of important that the walls can be repaired. Also, I place landmines everywhere. I also set up another copper patch, another iron patch, and an oil patch. It's tedious, but I also set these up to have their own roboports, and even though it's hand-fed, it's enough to satisfy me. I've actually started taking big handfuls of landmines and throwing them into a provider chest, because as it turns out, they're extremely effective. I don't know, I think this run might have made me landmine-pilled. Unlike flamethrowers, the enemies don't even reach the walls half the time, and it's not that hard to just stash like 1,000 of them at a time since they're so cheap. Oh well, it's finally the part you've been waiting for, the montage. There it is, in all its glory. Mamma mia, that's a good spaghetti. It might be a simple vanilla base, and I've built a lot of them, but this is genuinely my favorite out of them all, even C-Block. I mean, that one had incredible scale, but there was just something about this ordered chaos that gets me. I've seen plenty of spaghetti bases, but the theme of this base is so consistent throughout and it just works perfectly. Even though the primary challenge was the mod preventing parallel buildings, it's really brought this unique aesthetic to it all. I found myself doing things I never would have bothered with otherwise, and it was nice to slow down and really consider these builds that I'd ordinarily just speed over. I mean, I can beat Factorio pretty casually in about 8 hours, and 4 hours if I'm really sweating, but this took me a little over 50 hours. Hopefully it's not just me who can't stop staring at this. It's really interesting to see all the sciences split up like this, like, here's red science, green science, and military science. This whole thing down here is chemical science, and it's got some weapon manufacturing tacked on its side. Purple science consumes this whole area up here, just like yellow science does down here. Then finally, you've got space science, and altogether, it really illustrates all the relative demands. The Factorio promotional art is right. After doing this, I am thoroughly convinced that this is the true way to play the game. Every build ended up being its own little brain teaser, and I just picked at it piece by piece until the whole thing was finished. The amount of forethought I had to put into building this just to get the silo in the center was immense, and the amount of technical knowledge it required beats out most overhauls. I mean, there's room for improvement. There's a lot of empty spaces I could have filled with a little better planning, and even though they're separated, things like the red circuit builds are just kind of wonky versions of a usual array. These insane direct insertion builds are much more interesting and unique, but it's a difficult thing to balance. I love how when you look at it from the map, it's like some kind of slime mold that spread out its tendrils to search for food. Either that or a cancer that's metastasized. I stress tested the rails, and despite the insanity, they are perfectly capable of keeping up with the throughput. As usual, I've got to thank my patrons. I'm not going to say that this wouldn't have been possible without them, but in the theater of YouTube blood sports, it's nice to have some assurance that I don't need to go chasing trends. It's because of all that dedicated support that I feel like I've got the freedom to really focus on all the details of a base like this. If you want to go watch this base work without it being butchered by the YouTube compression algorithm, all of my saves are available on my Patreon. I mean, me personally, I could just watch this all day. But, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.